Hey guys, it's Matt. If you could hold off commenting as long as possible, because this video is just as much about your comments, basically a voting video, we are going to weigh what is the greatest generation to be born in, or you could say, what was the greatest time to live in. We'll look at all the current generations, X, Y, Z, baby boomers, but we'll go back in time, even name some old ones that don't even seem to have official names. The one around Lincoln's time in the 1800s, I've named Lincoln's rabble. We'll go all the way back to BC. Some of you might vote it would be better if you're going to go back to 1300 or 1000. There's still some asshole kings and sheriffs of Nottingham and those types of bastards you have to live under. Might as well go all the way back to BC. Matt, if I have to live like that, I want to go back to the first scene in 2001, A Space Odyssey. Although nobody here believes we were monkey men. But you know what I mean? We'll put everything on the table, so don't comment. That being said, many people are already starting to comment, as usual. Okay, we'll do a voting video. And then I'll name each generation like Lincoln's rabble. So if that's your time period that you prefer, then you vote for that. And we'll look at the comments and maybe we'll tabulate it. One proviso or rule before we get started, because this type of video doesn't work if people make their choice based on this. Can't really choose a time period to live in or what would be your preferred era to live in or be born in if it's just to be with a certain person or experience a certain event. Or a Christian, of course, would say, I want to go back to zero, or BC. I'd want to be with Jesus. You can't really vote that way. It doesn't work for what we're trying to do here. Of course, it would be assumed you'd want to do that. But for our purposes here, I'd have to say, if you pick zero or -5 BC or whatever, I'm going to say you're going to be living in Germany. You won't even know about Christ. You'll be living in Siberia or what's called Montana today. If you pick that time period, our one rule here is you're not going to know at all about the person that you're trying to go back and seek out. And the second rule coming supports the first rule. If you go back in time, one of the rules in your consideration here before you pick your era, you will have a knowledge of how you lived in this time period in 2023. You'll know about the internet, but here's the thing. When you go back, you won't have any knowledge of what's playing out in that time period. You'll generally know what to expect in terms of the lifestyle to be lived. No running water, for example, in the house in 1750. But you're not going to know the Declaration of Independence is coming. So that's another rule, because people will say, oh, I want to be around Philadelphia in 1776 and see how that played out. You won't know those events are coming. Without these rules, this doesn't work. But you do need to carry an understanding of what life is like today, so you can compare and contrast. For example, if somebody picks 1600, let's say I pick 1600, the first thing that I would notice and just love, I don't know how long it would before it wore off, no plane noise, no car noise, no construction noise, just the silence of it would be incredibly beautiful to me. I was out and about here around the house yesterday, Thanksgiving, and it's very quiet on the roads. Christmas Day is like that, and there's a silence that's so unusual. And I enjoy it so much until here comes a car around the corner. But, so you wouldn't appreciate the silence of 1650 unless you remembered what life was like in 2023. And if we didn't remember what life was like in 2023, getting away, don't you want to get away? Getting away to these other eras, it would seem like nothing, because we would just be, again, taking every great aspect of the era for granted because we would have no comparison point. So you remember what life is like in 2023, the pseudo hell that the society is descending into, but you don't remember the events coming when you go back, okay? If this guy Jesus pops up, you have no idea who he is unless you decide to follow him. As I said, you'll probably be 1,000 miles away anyway. You're not knowing something called the Civil War is coming if you pick 1850. Okay, these are the two rules. Other than that, anything goes. But again, remember, this is not a time travel exercise. Oh, I'd want to go back and see this. I want to go back and see how they built the Great Pyramids. No, it's about how you want to live your life. You trade, as I just said, no noise of planes and city noise for the fact that you might have to walk a mile to get your water every day. These types of trade-offs. You trade a certain degree of peace, assuming you can live outside of the clutches of a king or a tyrant in 1500 and something, in the serenity of a forest that hasn't been chemicaled by Monsanto and Dow Chemical. Do you trade that against the fact that you get a few teeth problems? There's going to be a guy, with like, I don't know how they do it, 2 rocks with a foot up against a tree, pulling them out. I mean, that's the sort of trade-off are you prepared to make? I mean, there's obvious advantages and disadvantages to any era. All right, let's start by looking at the generations where most of us have heard the name, even the greatest generation, 1900, etc. Then my next slide takes it back much further, basically all the way back to 0 or even BC, if you want to vote as that is your preferred generation you'd want to be born in. Of course, I don't have it broken down as we go back towards 0 every 30 or 40 years. I don't know exactly. I don't remember how I did it. Maybe 500 or even 1,000-year time slots. So the current one now, we'll do this quickly, and then we'll start weighing the pros and cons. And if I'll just walk you through this. If anybody's driving a long drive home or whatever on a Friday, you don't need to see the next 2 slides. Generation Alpha is the current one. Person born in the early 2010s to mid 2020s, and it will continue. They said Generation Alpha will continue to 2025. Baby born now, it's Generation Alpha. I'm not sure how many people would vote for that. But anyway, Matt, stop with the commentary. Just the facts, ma'am. Zoomers, Generation Z. I've never heard Zoomers before. Generation Z, born 1997 to 2012. Millennials, or Generation Y, 1980, say, to 96. Generation X, that's me, 1965 through 1980. The baby boomers, 46 through 1964. The silent generation. I'd never heard of this, but it's interesting how they slotted this in. This would be my father and his friends, and they didn't have to fight in any war. They're sandwiched by generations that did a whole lot. I'm not sure. This generation, I can understand why it's called the silent, but we'll visit it later. 1928 to 1945. Again, born right before World War II, didn't fight in it. Little bit old even to fight in Vietnam. Didn't do that, So greatest generation, which is aptly named in my opinion, 1901 to 1927. The lost generation. This is new to me. 1883 to 1900. Roughly 15 years after the Civil War. Now, these are mine coming up next. Okay, this is how I've named the other generations for your consideration. And I'm sure almost nobody wants to live where we are now, so these are all for your consideration. And I have some overlap, so you can see in general how these others fit in. So we'll start with a little bit of overlap. Again, the silent generation, 1928 to 1945. The greatest generation, 1900 to 1927. Born in 1900 to 1927. That's the way this is presented, of course, which means the person could live to 2000 or 2005. Okay, lost generation, born 1883 to 1900. Then what I've named Lincoln's rabble, 1800 to 1883. Washington's thugs, 1700 to 1800, the whole 100-year period in the 1700s. Born in. The screwed swordsman, 1400 to 1699. Now you see, here's all these considerations. You pick the screwed swordsman, there's a chance that you're living, a mile away is that king's castle, and he's a real sheriff of Nottingham asshole. You putting up with a lot more of these ass. Okay, we'll do the pros and cons later. Crabgrass soup connoisseurs before 1400, like 0 to 1400. I mean, what was life like for that, right? And then playing in the dirt. The generation playing in the dirt, rolling around, playing BC. You might argue, I can hear people yelling, Matt, there's no real difference in quality of life in playing in the dirt BC versus the screwed swordsman. I mean, what they got different? They can make an axe and a forge. I mean, they still got to go for their water. They still crap in a hole. It's not that, they don't have penicillin. It's still not that much different. I hear you. So you go playing in the dirt, the populations are very low, less chance that you're next to some castle or keep with some asshole inside that says he's nobility. It's going to tell you to pay up or something, or come get your woman for prima nocta. Okay, guys, this is the slide where the rubber hits the road. I spent a lot of time on this. I think I haven't missed anything big, and I've been very thorough. This will take a while to get through. If you can't read it, we'll go through it one by one. Again, as usual, don't need to see anything. But what we're doing here is meant to be taken seriously. See, for example, some of you, I'm sure, already picked out the little area you want to live in, and you'll say, Matt, as far away as possible from the internet. See, you haven't really thought it through. I mean, it can be really difficult life in certain eras. We're going to go through the pros and the cons. It's much more difficult than just some fantasy that it'll always be sunny in Philadelphia, and you just have this little garden plot picked out, and you have to take these real nasty parts of the era in which maybe you choose to live seriously. You have to think them through. From no dentistry to shitting in a hole to, safety and disease, wars, all of that. Okay, this exercise is not just some fantasy. It's meant to be, it's a very serious mental exercise that those that want to go through this with me. So, of course, it has to start with food and water, farming versus hunter-gathering. Okay, basic farming has existed, they say 5 to 10,000 BC, the ability to turn certain seeds into a limited crop in your backyard if the rain was right. Not just hunter-gathering, hunting down a saber-toothed tiger and picking berries. Not the basic agriculture. Real farming, anything you would know of as farming, really didn't come in till about 14 or 1500, and then major advances, of course, in 1800. So water and food. I mean, this is a place to start. I mean, are you willing, if you pick a time period, you better be willing to not eat for 2 or 3 days sometimes. 2 or 3 days every 2 or 3 weeks or a month, or go 4 days without eating, or just berries or crabgrass soup. If you pick a time farthest away as possible, as you might say from the internet. I mean, have you thought this through? Now, water is water. Okay, we're going to assume anywhere you live, you're going to be, somewhat close to a stream that's clean, or adequate rain, so that we'll give the water. Okay, that's such a essential life. Everybody's close to a water source, even the digging of a local well. But water and food, I mean, you go back. Matt, I want to be as far away from the internet as possible. I want to go back 4,000 years, hunter gathering. Okay, you going 5 days sometimes without eating, boy. Have you think that through? This ain't a fantasy. Oh, we just want to be as far away from the internet as possible with a bottle of lube. Thanks for giving me this fantasy, Matt. This is a hardcore pipe hitting exercise, dude. Next category I called the conveniences of the time. Have you thought about this? Even things like shoes. Okay, what are you putting on your feet if you want to go back and be the noble savage, farthest away from the internet as possible, the hunter-gatherer? What are you tying on your feet so you don't get all sorts of thorns stuck in there every night, picking out the thorns, just carrying water? Got to carry it in the gut of a sheep, or, at the outhouse. Where do you go to the bathroom? I mean, the convenience of the time, to me, the big ones are carrying water, transporting food, and shoes, or basic domestication of animals. So I'll give you that in terms of domestication of animals. If you pick 1600, I'll give you a cow. I'll give you a pig. Maybe even a horse. You could ride out locally. Or if you want to be like the old woman in Cold Mountain, or Inman, WP. Inman found that old woman with the goats. Goat can give you companionship. Goat can give you warmth, sometimes meat. I'll give you some basic domestication. This way, some people might say, Matt, I know myself. I can't go 4 days without eating or whatever. You do basic domestication of animals, you're not going to go without completely eating. In some way, you'll be able to fill your belly. But don't pick 0 or BC, or don't pick, I don't know, maybe who knows what they had. Did they have basic domestication of animals in 500? I don't know, but don't go too far back, because then you got nothing but a berry bush and a hole. Next category, of course, has to be shelter or heat. How many people, when I introduce this topic, think, oh, you're just the noble savage. The sun will always shine perfectly, or you could be on your Gilligan's Island under the banana tree, never be hungry. No, that's not the way it worked back 1,000 years ago, or even 200 years ago. You got to think shelter, heat. And, well, what if I live in Jamaica? You ain't living in Jamaica under these circumstances. This ain't no Gilligan's Island exercise. You're going to be in, I'm not saying St. Petersburg, Russia either. But for this exercise, we have to assume a somewhat cold climate. Germany, France, UK. Okay, shelter, heat's a big deal. Are you willing? I mean, this is where you have to be real honest with yourself. Are you willing to be cold? I know, Thaddeus would teach us how the body can adapt, but still, Thaddeus, we are not bears. I mean, we are not, are you willing that this is a legitimate question, even though, as Thaddeus would tell us, the body would adapt to the cold much more than you can possibly imagine. Are you willing to be cold 5-6 months at night, at almost all the time, unless you get that little break of sun or heats up to 40 or 50 degrees? I mean, real shelter, it's not going to come into play until, 1600 and some. Mud thatch and straw on the roof, basic fireplace techniques. I mean, I know, we're not going to get into the heating thing. I've been studying that. Some of the Roman heating systems that run underground, I mean, it does go back thousands of years. We're going to assume most people don't have the ability to get that. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the army to build it. So it is thatched roofs. I mean, think about this. Back in 1700, it's your fireplace, and your fireplace would heat up a large amount of cob or mud or masonry, and that would heat up and radiate heat out for a few hours. But it's basically go back and look at the scene. And again, we'll do Inman, W. Cold Mountain, and what is it, Natalie Portman. I'm just here with my baby. You wouldn't take advantage of me if you just come in here. If I let you in with me, you and my baby. She just had that. She had that stove, a small stove. And, they had a good representation because they would wrap the stovepipe around the house as much as possible before the chimney, because the stovepipe acted as a radiator. But the farther you go back in time, this is a cold climate exercise. I ain't giving you Jamaica as a possibility. Are you willing to be cold? See, some people are like, no, I couldn't take that. So, Matt, that eliminates. To be honest, I'd have to be 18, 20 or onward for some degree of boiler heat or coal heat. So that some people will be like, no, I can't take 5 days without eating. Therefore, my choices are somewhat limited. There could be something we come across on this list where you'll say, real honestly, Matt, I know myself. There's no way I could go without that. Therefore, many people will be put into an era box because of that reason. Nobody listening to me would want to live in the time period we're living now. I should have stressed that more in the beginning. That's a given. There ain't nobody that's been at this channel for more than 5 days that wants to live in the time period, the adulterated, bastardized mess of where we're living now. We all, to a degree, fantasize about the noble savage. We watch Dances with Wolves hoping it was us. Next on the list, I wrote community, cities versus small tribes. What was Paris like in 1650 with the Merovingians, 1750, 1800? Do you want to be in a city where there will be easier access to food? That's why people go to the city. There would definitely be survival advantages versus small tribes. If anybody's screaming at me, Matt, I want to be by myself, just me and my wife. No, you're not going to be Tarzan. I'm not giving you that option. Nobody by themselves is going to survive more than a month or two. No. Even wolf attacks, or the animals were much more prevalent before everything was taken down to the extinction level. You have to, the minimum I will give you for this exercise is, if you don't want the big city in 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900, or you could pick New York City in 1970. Pick up something in the Bronx, relatively cheap, in those burnout neighborhoods. Small tribes is all I'm going to give you, like Braveheart. William, somebody's coming. It's the McGregors from the next clan. Not a bunch of you Ammonites having the fun on your own. Small tribes gotta be in a community for survival. Okay, that's you have to factor. I'm not giving anybody you can be out in the woods living deliberately on your own. That's bullshit. If you're writing the comment, I'm going to be by myself 100 miles north of Versailles in 1710, you're disqualified. Next category I wrote, day-to-day welfare. Walking down the street. How safe is it to go get water? General safety, disease, animal attacks, thugs, brigands, the humongous gang. No, I'm not going to do the voice. I mean, okay, let's get the disease. That's just something we almost have to eliminate. The Black Plague. We don't know what these things were in history, really. For the most part, think about the foods that were eaten. For the most part, people were probably much healthier, other than the fact that certain things that arise can't be treated. I mean, it's basically, to me, I see it as an even trade-off without spending weeks and weeks researching this. Certain things do come up. Appendicitis, guys, in 1650 is a death sentence. Appendicitis. A segment of our community's knee-jerk reaction, of course, is modern medicine brings all disease. It's just not being fair. A skin cancer, a melanoma, 150 years ago is a death sentence. There's a lot of stuff like this, guys. No, not every time you go to the doctor for a melanoma or appendicitis, they're not all out to harm. I mean, there's a segment of our truth community just not fair. Even teeth rot can destroy the body. Modern dentistry keeps us incredibly healthy over what existed. I'm just asking, the truthers that dig in this side, the ones that believe penicillin isn't real, be fair. Even penicillin, there's infection in the past that killed millions and millions of people every year. Basic infection. Pam was bitten by Zara, and it got very infected. So much so the doctor says, I'm going to give you an antibiotic shot. And because it was so bad. And it was 2 days later, she felt much better, much better. I mean, there's actually a small segment in our community, and I have no idea if these people are here, why they would be here, that believe that they believe penicillin is like some sort of cake in a lake hoax or something. I mean, it's just no, sorry. Bacterial infections in what they call the human being is real, and penicillin has saved hundreds of millions of lives. So that's a factor if you're going to consider where you want to live. You pick 1,500 wherever, you could scrape your finger, and that finger may have to come off. 2%, 5% chance. Are you thinking about these sorts of things? Animal attacks. You live in the clans, or in the Irish Highlands. You have your clan around you, or at least other homes. The animal attacks. That's why people live in clans or dances with wolf tribes and things like that, and also to ward off the thugs and the brigands or the gangs. So this is just general day-to-day welfare is a factor to consider. The next category, war, from, say, being recruited into the king's army to tribal warfare. Now, let's do the tribal one first. Picture, the Pawnee on the warpath, dances with wolves. I think most here would agree that sort of conflict is unavoidable, no matter what time period you pick. I mean, the human, what they call the human, is a low thing for the most part. Although, we've been fooled into believing that governments are necessary and there are all these bad guys, and people are yelling at me right now, and I can hear you saying tribes will learn to live together. And as what's presented in Dances with Wolves, the Pawnee wasn't always on the warpath, and I agree, that is blown a bit out of proportion, in my opinion. So government always wants to position itself as necessary. You need us to protect. You need the King's Army to protect you. But I don't think, you would have these bands of the Humongous Gang, the Brigands, and okay, anybody listening to me now, no matter what time period you choose to go back to, I think would put up with occasional tribal conflict from time to time, probably unavoidable for the animalistic human. What we don't want, or what we would not put up with, is being recruited into the King's Army. So I'm no expert on this, but as you pick your time period, one would think as you got closer to 1600, 1700, early 1800s, with larger cities and more infrastructure and larger things that call themselves governments, more chances you're going to encounter this sort of thing. Yeah, these kings and the nobility and these assholes have been around a long time, but how sparse were populations in 1500 going down, 14, 13, 12. Chances of being recruited into some king's army, even, probably even in 1700, low, but it's still a possibility. You might as well just jump right to the next one because they're related. The next category is local assholes. Again, how close are you going to be living to a tyrant? King George, here it says, all the way down to Idi Amin, these types of tyrants, the Genghis Khan types, you're going to say, hey, would you like to join me in taking over 1/3 of the world? We can do that? We can do that. Pontius Pilate type assholes stemming out of the Roman Empire. Okay, it's like a roll of the dice. No matter when, Matt, I can hear you screaming. I mean, no matter when you go back to, Matt, there's a chance you're going to be living close to a Sheriff of Nottingham asshole, and he's going to try to impose his will on you, whether it be his taxes, his recruiting you into the army, or his prima nocta for your first night of your wedding. Okay, but as you go closer to when population started to boom, what were populations in 1500 and 1600? I mean, the Braveheart depiction is probably pretty accurate for the, how many miles to the next clan? I mean, it's not that hard to stay away from a king or any other sons of bitches as you go back in time, say prior to 1650. I don't know, but you see what I'm saying. But then look at a movie like you're going to reference movies, Matt. How do I know? I think Barry Lyndon. I was going to talk about Barry Lyndon, the Kubrick story, Barry Lyndon. I think it's probably pretty accurate depiction of the time period. I mean, Kubrick was very clear he would only shoot the table scenes with candlelight only. How am I supposed to know what the hell it was like? I think it's probably pretty accurate. But whoever played, was it Ryan O'Neal, whoever played Barry Lyndon, he quickly found himself caught up fighting in the Prussian army, whatever that is. As the time got closer to 1700 or 1750, 1800, the chance of getting caught up, being recruited in some asshole's army would have to go up just by pure population numbers alone. That's a factor. I don't think anybody here that's listening to the words coming out of my mouth wants to be recruited up into the Prussian army, end up having to build a mall outside of Philadelphia. Matt, what about women's issues? You seem to be dominant on the male side. Well, I'm dominant on the male side because I can only really come from a male perspective in terms of how many kids women were expected to bear. Rape. I have no idea. I can't put myself in I can't do it. I'm sorry. I am a man. Can that be said legally in 2023? I can't examine all the scenarios of what it would be like. That is a factor as you do this for yourself, but you understand why I can't balance it out. I don't know what it would be like to be I can barely understand what it'd be like to be a man, but as I've read books and read history and watched movies, we have put ourselves in those situations to a degree over a 30-year period. I've never once thought, what would it be like to be a woman in that bar? A wench? I haven't. I'm sorry, this is not balanced. What more can I say? Well, Matt, why don't you just try it? Identify differently over the next, say, 15 minutes. I bet a whole new world comes to you. Even if that were possible, I'm not going to do it. Let's move on. The next category is modern conveniences you can't live without. Many people will succumb to the fallacy of the noble savage and not really understand how hard certain aspects of life will be, where other people will be very quickly, very honest, be like, Matt, I could not live without electricity. Candlelight, going to bed at 5:45, or Matt, it has to be an era with electricity. That puts me, hey, Matt, 1880, the Gilded Age, would be a whole lot in New York City, would be a whole lot better, far away from the internet, no planes overhead. I'll take that middle of the road, Matt. I don't have to go all the way back to the opening scenes in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where bones are being thrown up in the air. So some people might, running water, running water and plumbing. I don't know when the big cities got it, but of course, through the 1700s, through 18 whatever, definitely through the Gettysburg Address, 95% of at least the United States and the West, there's no running water. There's no, in terms of, there's outhouses for 95%. Some people will be very honest, be like, I can't live without my toilet, dude. I'm picking, we don't have to pick the farthest possible away from the internet. I don't have to pick 20,000 BC. I'd be very satisfied in 1910 or 18 whatever, and knowing that the internet is not coming in my lifetime, and transition lifestyles are not coming in. Not that there's anything wrong if people want to just be by themselves there, but we're tired of it being put in our face. That's the problem. Okay, that's a whole different video. Some people will be very honest, and if they say, I can't live without this modern convenience, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. In fact, I applaud that honesty. Next, your profession or work. What are you going to be doing for 50 hours a week? This proviso here was not that you just get a magic stipend. Little blue people come out of their little huts at night and leave little packages so you can buy your food. You got to work for it, dude. Sorry. Farming. What are the farming techniques? Do you want to be a blacksmith? I know right now, blacksmith, I'd do 3 days. I'd have tennis elbows so bad. I couldn't, my wrists and arms are not set up for that banging metal like that. I couldn't do it. You have to have a profession, or you will not be able to put food on the table. Again, the fantasy or fallacy of the noble savage kind of goes away. Could you be out running around trying to throw a spear into something? Other than that, if you want to be as far away from the internet as possible and this modern bastardization of a world, then you might have to pick, industry of the early 1900s or the industry of World War II, where you go home and there is a flushing toilet, there is electricity, and there is a lot of gainful employment in the United States, and it hasn't all moved to China or overseas yet. There's nothing, we don't have to go back to 1610. I don't think there's much wrong at all with picking, Matt, I go right back to 1930 or 1940 or whatever. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the profession and what you're going to do to put food on the table is a huge factor here. Some people might like people screaming at me, I would be a good hunter-gatherer. I could go 3 days. For that level of pure freedom, I could go 3 days without eating. Take me back to 1000 BC and I'd be just fine. Hey, there are people here in our community that believe that. They're not lying to themselves. It's legitimate. I'm just asking you and keep reminding you to be legitimately, not the fallacy or the fantasy, the psychological fantasy of the noble savage. Just thinking about all the beautiful parts of this noble savage's life and not considering the harsh parts. Next, I wrote family life. Not really sure what I even mean by this now, but there could be a whole host of things to consider. Arranged marriages. Is it possible to go through the society you want to live in as a man or woman not married? The size of the family that is expected to be produced in terms of the number of children in that era, in that country. You know, some people do it for survival. You have to have the 5 kids in a certain era or time period because those kids have to start working in the fields and start producing food. And the young women will grow up and they will tend to the younger daughters born in a family of 5 or 7. I'm sure there's a lot in this category that I won't think about or we won't get to, partially because I've never had a family myself. But here's a big one. And, you know, this is really getting to the core of being honest and doing this exercise. There are certain eras where it's expected 1 or 2 of the children will die. Okay, that there's certain places and certain eras where it's expected, or not. If not expected, you would think it was a 50-50 chance. A Tiny Tim, in one of the versions of Christmas Carol, the future that didn't come to fruition, but he was born sickly and he dies. And as everybody knows here, as you go back hundreds of years, this is dying in childbirth. This is very common. So, I mean, this is a big aspect of family life. If somebody's saying, I couldn't potentially bear that, then you better be living in an era with a decent medical, abilities, at least 1900 and onward. Finally, the catch-all category, miscellaneous or personal factors. The silence is important to me, I referenced earlier, but it's not everything. But in this case, let's say that silence is everything. Somebody may say, Matt, I'd go to an era where there's no chance of a train sound, no chance of a car, of a plane, no chance of any industrial sound. Then you pick your date there and you go back from there. I mean, that could be, it's important to me, but based on all the other things I have to weigh here, it might not be the only thing. I'll tell you what I would pick, by the way, at the end. I'll tell you what my choice would be. No planes, clean air, clean water. I mean, if you're in Pittsburgh in 1890 or 1900, it's not clean air and clean water, and there's a fog over the entire city. But you're probably getting real food, of course. You're getting real corn that hasn't been modified. Real beef, or you're getting real seeds. I mean, so there's a trade-off. Real people. I mean, what's your cutoff date to get real people? Where there's no download. People acting funny. It's like they're coming from another dimension or something. I'll think about this, guys. When was the last day, not the last real person, but when the fake people started to pop up? There could always be, the NPC may be a real thing here in this reality system, but they were very real. It wasn't like today, where these movements can come on television and millions of people start to bow down to them in complete lunacy. I'm not just talking about those lifestyle choices. I'm talking about 100 other things. How the Karens did what they did in 2020, and they just follow a download, and it's just totally bizarre. There's a whole segment of people that, for lack of better words, we would say they're not real people. They're not the same entity that we are. Does that, Matt, if that's the case, then those different people would exist in the 50s, in 1850. Yeah, I guess, but I don't know. It seems like that's something to consider. It seems like there could be, there's a technology or mechanism at play in the modern age that affects people to basically go insane. I don't know any other way to put it. Somebody might say, I want no part of any sort of politics, any sort of campaigning I can't deal with. Put me in an era before that. And if even there was always campaigning, I guess, the not milk existed in the United States in the 1800s. But you wouldn't be, so you'd see a little article in the paper now and then about politics. Was that something that would really affect your life? Where we go into the election season here, starting right now through November, and there'll be just thousands and thousands of television commercials and things in our face and getting up in our business, and we won't be able to get away with it get away from it as long as we live in the modern society. Politics, what's the date where it became completely disgusting and doesn't just seem like two people running, and you just can't take it, and you have to live in an era before that date. Again, you might know that FDR was running against whoever in the early 40s, or whenever it might be, the late 30s. It would be for FDR. It would be the New Deal of the mid 30s. You may know he's running, but would it be in your face? That's probably something you could live with, whether it be real or not milk. It's not in our face to the 1/1,000,000th degree that it is now. And finally, for this category, if you have something quirky, that I can't anticipate, like I can't live without my Beatles collection, or I could never live without Star Wars. If you have something quirky like that overrides basically everything. Well, I can't anticipate that, but that's a factor as well, I guess. So in doing the last long segment, my hope would be that you'd say back to me, Matt, there's a whole lot more to consider than I thought or that I anticipated, and some major factors that weren't really apparent until we went through this. That's all. I bet most of you thought there was several things here that you just thought, yeah, that's a factor, and you may not really think of these things just under the fantasy of being the noble savage as far away from the internet as possible. So let me tell you about what I would pick. I don't need to go back and live in Merovingian France in 1680 or whatever, whenever they were doing whatever they were doing to goats. And I don't need, I'd love to go back in a time machine and experience, Valhalla Rising, that movie, 1500 and nothing around and not a sound other than the crickets and the birds. And yeah, I'd like to do that, but it's just too hardcore survival for me. I'm being very honest. I'm not going to play the fallacy of the noble savage. The generation I'm in is X, not bad, but too much of this lunacy, too much, I'm in my early 50s. Hopefully I have a decent amount left. This is just insane already. And how bad is it going to get as that ship of fools continues to sail? So the baby boomer generation would be preferred for me over the Generation X where I am. But best case to me would be the silent generation, born in 1928 to 1945. Okay, most of the silent generation, it's 2023. Obviously, most of them are long gone. They just started to see at the end of their life, this thing came at the very end called the internet. And the internet era was relatively sane for roughly 10 to 12 years before it completely got out of control. And there's an absolute, maybe we'll never understand it while we're in this body, but there's an absolute correlation, 1-to-1, between the rise of the internet and the insanity of what they call the human being. There is no doubt about it. Maybe we'll have fun pondering how that's possible, but there's just, we may disagree on the mechanism, but there's no doubt about it. Or what are the chances this thing, the internet, comes and all of a sudden the world starts to, from our perspective, go insane? We don't need to know exactly the mechanism or exactly how that happened at every twist and turn. We just need to realize, and I'm sure most of you would agree, that that is the result. You walk around the corner of your kitchen, there's a cracked egg on the floor, a mess you have to clean up. Well, that's the result, right? We agree there's a cracked egg there. Exactly how it happened. Did the cat jump up and roll it off? Or it doesn't really matter. The cracked egg's there. The insanity is here. And it is a correlation with the internet. It's not a coincidence. Okay, so I'm sitting here for like 2 or 3 minutes. What's the primary basis or factors driving my decision? Well, one I already mentioned. I don't want to have to, take a spear out and try to get my meal. So living, 1890 onward, where food is relatively easy to come by. That's a pretty big factor. And it's not me being soft. I mean, why shouldn't it be a big factor? It's nothing. You're not less of a man saying you like to go to bed warm at night with a full belly. That's just a part of being human. Probably most people that say that's not a factor for them. They're not being honest. But anyway, I can't speak for everybody. What I'm really trying to avoid is the time of true insanity. All right. I put that at 2012 through today. Now, I don't want to get into the world shifted and Mayan calendar and all that. We'll ponder all that. All that is on the table. I'm not going to take any strange stuff off the table, but we're not going to do that at this point. I want an era prior to mine where I limit my time or avoid the insane time. Well, called the time of insanity. Now, 2012 through today. Now, 2003 or 4, and George Bush doing the Gulf War, whatever, 2, or all. I mean, it wasn't the mid 2000s was the insanity was the Valhalla rising, insanity rising. But it wasn't nearly. It was a weird shift happened in 2012. The end of my life going into the early 2000s. Whatever. I wouldn't be thrilled with that either. But at least I completely, through the lost generation, I completely avoid the time of insanity. And the problem with Generation X, not bad. Growing up the way we did, mothers would let us out, ride the bikes, and the Atari 2600, some technology, but certainly that technology wouldn't be considered sinister. Some amazing moments on the big screen and what movies had become. I just watched Poltergeist recently. I know I've mentioned it in the past, but you want movie making? I mean, again, it's limited in what could be done in the early 80s, but guys, you want movie making and real intrigue. I mean, Poltergeist is amazing. It really is for its time period. And they could do it today. They could do it. Of course, they know how to do it today. The movie reviewers don't understand that. They do it. They choose not to. But anyway, that's another video. Generation X, not bad in terms of the way I grew up. And those few years down in Ocean City, New Jersey, and the music every new week was a new incredible hit song, and it just you knew one was come right after the other. Casey Kasem's top 30 countdown. Every week there was always new songs that were better than the ones before, and it was fun. But there's too much time in the insane world for me. And Matt, why don't you just go do? I'm not going to go act out that scene in Saturday Night Fever on the bridge, and I'm not going to. Okay, but I'm saying if I had my choice, just a magic wand, boom, you could be living your full life. If that magic wand came out, then I would be. If I was in the silent generation right now, it would be the mid 60s. I guess at my age, it would be not my age. It would be the mid 60s. It would be the mid 1960s for my age. Do you know what Southern California was like in the early to mid 1960s? Oh my God. Paradise. You know what certain parts of San Francisco were like in the mid 60s? I understand why they're excited about that Haight-Ashbury shit. I mean, it really was incredible. It's like the Knottnilk looked at it and said, well, we tried to get our footholds in there. We tried to keep the proletariat and the great unwashed out, but there's too many millions of them. So what should we do? Destroy it. Do everything to destroy California first. These proletariat and great unwashed can't have access to that paradise. What should we do? Destroy it. That's basically what they did. I'm not joking. Well, one proviso, I don't think they tried to keep it for themselves through the artificial gold rush and that BS. They wanted the great unwashed to move west. They didn't try to keep it for themselves. I mean, the gold rush proves that. The gold rush is a bunch of bullshit. If the Knottnilk didn't want people in mass to go into California, they would have never, even if there really was gold found in the ground. And I think it was 1/10 of what they said. It was an artificial circumstance to get people to go out there. It's not like then you can go back. It took you months and everything you had to get out there. Then you stuck out there, but why are you going to leave? It is like a paradise from a weather perspective and everything else, certain pockets of agriculture. So, that's the provide. Certainly they didn't want to keep the people out. It's almost like it's a repeating theme with this Knottnilk. It's you offer up not a perfection, but I don't know any other way to talk about it, and then you work to destroy it. And if the people allow it to be destroyed, then they get points or something in this game. And they do this with everything, at very small scales, like the first 3 Star Wars movies, to very large scales, the perfection of what Southern California was. in 1940, 1950, 1960. Even from a race perspective, in the movie Ray. Matt, you always, don't you know any hear real history? No. All I got is what Ray Charles said in the movie, but it's probably historically accurate. He said, we need to move to California. We can't be raising our kids in the South because out there, the equality is closer than anywhere else. So even from that perspective, it was leaps ahead of most other parts of the country, the West Coast. So the West Coast. So the Notnilk, it gets points. It puts out things that are not perfect, but it's hard to talk on the fly sometimes. That are really, really incredible. Then if the people allow its destruction, which the people always do, the Notnilk seems to get points in this strange game. So I'll take the silent generation, and I'll do 5 minutes on what life may be like if you want to stick with me. 1928 to 1945, so say born in 1930. Matt, you're born right into the beginning of the Depression. Well, I'm a baby. I don't know. As long as I can get something in my mouth or whatever and fill I don't know. Let's just assume my belly could be filled and I'm not going to be put on some doorstep. These are extenuating circumstances that I'm not bringing into this conversation. I'm talking about nobody put on no doorstep. So fine, I get through we're coming out of the Depression, World War II, but I'm still very young going into World War II, so I'm not going to be drafted into World War II unless they take 12-year-olds or whatever, 13, 14-year-olds. So that come out of that. Then the boom starts. Manufacturing here and tons of open space, tons of land, very few planes overhead. And, some of the pollution in Pittsburgh from the early 1900s is getting better. And again, just there's not all these government agencies getting up in your business all the time. And, the tax man exists, I know. But, basically, I know, look, I'm not going to choose an era to live in because FDR, following the good advices of Woodrow Wilson, pushed the tax rate up to 90%. I'm not going to pick an era based on the tax rate. I mean, come on. I know. There's going to be, but basically, the government wasn't the Jabba the Hutt behemoth. You could decide to be a interior decorator. You need no license from the government. There's 20 states now. If you want to help people hang curtains, you need a license. I mean, it was a lesser Jabba the Hutt in that era. But then you had the wonders of, air travel. You could take that first flight and fly to Chicago, and never in the world could you imagine in the same day you could be in another city like that. That must have been incredible, wondrous, and the change in music and the cinema as it evolved over the decades. And, no major wars or major threats to deal with as a young person coming out on the other side of World War II. And the medical care and dental's decent. And, the cities aren't being burned out and bombed out, and the internet's a long way away. And the nasty aspects of the Notnilk as it is evolved into the ultimate Jabba the Hutt energy vampire it's there, but it's a long way away in terms of its sick, hopefully not, final form. Hopefully the pendulum, if we're ever lucky, will swing back the other way, but that doesn't seem likely. A long way away from the real insanity of social media that would drive the world insane starting in 2012. A long way from that. So even the baby boomer is not bad either. That is a possibility for me. Matt, you'd be coming to the end of your life. I'm just saying, well, no, I'd be the same age now, but then go back in time for what it would be. All that. Lots of conveniences. Running water, no problem. Pretty much everywhere you go. Electricity, pretty much everywhere you go. The ability to heat your house, pretty much everywhere you go. I'm so evil to make those choices. If you don't, you're allowed right now to go disconnect your electric. Maybe not. The authorities would eventually come pay a visit. You can turn your heat off right now. It's so unmanly to say these things would actually be important to some people. Go do it now. Go live the winter out in your back shed. So yeah, it's not so fast, right? So, the greatest generation wouldn't be bad, but the silent generation is a nice mix of, some of the modern, the ability to put food in your belly and, some modern agricultural techniques. And you can actually, there's so many things to think about, guys. You can get bananas and you can get certain fruits and the things that we know today in the grocery stores existed for the most part. You go back greatest generation or back, they've never seen a kiwi or they've never seen a mango. They have basic fruits, and there's a whole host of the world opened up, the ability to get not just foods from other countries, but things from other countries or shipped in. I mean, this is the things we take for granted. We get a taste of that in the silent generation. The silent generation would live right up to the year 2000 or so, or 2010. All right, I think for the silent generation, most would live to say to about right until when the real insanity starts. So that's what I'm afraid of the baby boomer generation is because they go 10 to 20 years through the time of 10 to 15 years through the time of insanity. And in terms of if I could have my wish here and anything was on the table and a genie popped out and I could live in another era, then if I could live in any other era, including 5000 BC, why would I even want to get close to the internet era that brought on the time of insanity, 2012 and on? I'm sorry for younger people listening. You make do with what you have. There's a lot of modern conveniences. You could have been born 5000 BC running around with the spear and the saber-toothed tiger. That ain't no good either. There's a lot of good that you can still find here. The forest still exists. The parks are still pretty nice. Still, I mean, this is worlds better than what the world, in my opinion, will be like in 2050 or 2060. So there's a lot to still be thankful for. I'm not trying to really depress anybody age 18 to 25 listening to me. I'm not. But and you wouldn't have any idea what we're really talking about. The taste of the old world. It just was a different place. Just a much more pure, much less more benign, less malignant, less sinister. Even though this not milk was here, it's always been here. It's just its ability was limited. It was impotent in many ways. It couldn't get up in your business all the time. Much closer to anything you could call as per the definition of freedom. So, but you don't really understand that if you're under age 30. Never lived in anything other. There's still a lot of amazing things. I'm not trying to depress anybody. All right, guys, I guess that's it. I'll look to your comments, and we'll, if the comments are pretty easy to tabulate, I'll try to report back what generation or what era most people picked. Thanks for listening, guys.